He put a pink film on his car, but was discriminated against by the male driver and maliciously targeted. I hit the steering wheel to avoid the flash, rushed out of the overpass and fell into the river and died. Instead of paying attention to the truth of the matter, the media focuses on my gender. Hashtag female driver wrote killer hashtag. I lived a new life and returned to the day when I put a film on my car. In view of the lessons of my previous life, I temporarily repented. But my father said, post must post the most pink. 1. That day I found the car film of ice plum pink on the internet, which was exquisite, pink and very girlish. I'm so interested that I want to fix my beloved car. After the preparation, I drove a pink car to pick up my friends in a few weeks. On the road, I also slowed down accordingly because the vehicles in front of me were slowing down. But a black SUV behind me honked crazily at me. I didn't care. I thought he was in a hurry and increased the speed a little. Unexpectedly, the male driver got inch by inch and maliciously drove another car. In order to avoid his sudden body, I hit the steering wheel and rushed straight out of the overpass and fell into the river. After that, the media did not pay attention to the truth of the matter, but focused on my gender. Several titles that have been on the hot search are hashtag the female driver fell into the river and died by operating a mistake hashtag female driver road killer hashtag whether women should be allowed to drive on the road hashtag. My father filed a lawsuit for me with tears in his eyes, but he lost the lawsuit because the road condition camera and my driving recorder were damaged and failed to produce valid evidence. When the male driver saw my father, he sneered, "Uncle, you have spare money to buy a car for your daughter. It's better to save money for yourself." Wow, how can a woman's driving be compared with our men? Only we men really have control over the car, and we shouldn't let women go on the road. And the male driver's family laughed disdainfully, and they sneered. Yes, the car is the symbol of a man. Who made your daughter not teach her husband well at home? If you have to be able to go on the road, you deserve to die. Give your mother's fart. I'll tear your mouth apart. My mother desperately pulled my father, who was about to rush up and do it. Don't stop me. My father struggled and raised his fist high to throw himself on the male driver. My mother put her mong around his waist and said in a choked voice, "Calm down. My daughter is gone. If you go in again, what if I'm left alone?" My soul floated in the air, watching the tragedy heartbrokenly. Not only that, what makes me more uncomfortable is, my cousin, who was 8 months pregnant, almost died here because of sexism on the road. If my brother-in-law hadn't protected her and the child under him, I'm afraid there would be 2 lives. I don't know what happened later. When I opened my eyes again, I went back to the day when I put on the film in the Ford store. I was reborn. I looked at the ice plum powder I chose, and the fear of death in my previous life came again. I held my forehead and said to the manager, "I'm sorry, I don't want to stick it." The manager looked embarrassed when he heard it. He frowned and said with some dissatisfaction, "Madam, we have already posted half of it. It's hard for us to do this." I insisted on not sticking it and proposed, "I will compensate you for the corresponding lost time. Please inform the staff to help me tear off the pink film that is pasted." The manager saw that I was generous, so he didn't ask any more questions. He nodded and was just about to go down to notify. But my father's voice sounded on the side. "No, stick it, why don't you stick it? My daughter can stick it in whatever color she likes." I quickly grabbed my father, frowned and said, "Dad, I really don't want to stick it on. The pink car film is not suitable for the road." My father patted me on the head and asked, "Who prescribed it?" That I was stunned. Yes, no one stipulates it. It is a stereotype formed by some male drivers. Pink represents women. When they saw the pink car, they couldn't help deliberately targeting and mocking it. My father was stunned when he saw me and held my hand with a smile. "So no one has stipulated it." Then he ordered the manager, "Post. Must be posted. The most pink one. 2. In the end, my beloved car was painted pinker than in my previous life. My father also put my favorite cartoon character stickers on me, and the whole car was packed cutely and girlishly. On the way home, I didn't dare to sit in the driver's seat. The accident in my previous life made me afraid of pink, cars and roads. Iuivoli. Dad, I have a hand recently, so I dare not open it. My father didn't say much and naturally sat in the driver's seat and took me home. But as expected, he was maliciously targeted again. Because of me, a conspicuous girl fan. My father drove normally on the road, but the vehicles behind him inexplicably sounded the horn at us. My father drove the car calmly and unhurriedly, observing the situation of the vehicle behind him through the rearview mirror from time to time. The white BMW in the back saw that the siren didn't work, so it rubbed our body and overtook in front of us. There was a sharp sound in the friction between the 2 cars. I can even see the contempt in the other party's eyes. The eyes seemed to say, "Wow, how dare the female driver go on the road? It's really like death." My father observed the situation of the BMW in silence, and the next second he began to accelerate and overtake the white BMW. I panicked and worried that my father and the BMW driver were chasing and racing on the road, which would cause an accident. I advised, "Dad, don't argue. They look down on female drivers. Female drivers are easy to cause car accidents on the road, so don't argue with them. I don't know when I agreed with the hidden rules of these roads. My father held the steering wheel, didn't squint, and said calmly, "They look down on you. If you even look down on yourself, it's really over. Don't be afraid, trust Dad." I was stunned, as if I suddenly realized how I had lived so carefully in this life. Obviously, it is not the female driver who is wrong, but the more difficult driving environment formed by people's prejudices. Looking at my father's focused side face, I gradually calmed down. My father drives very steadily. Overtaking not only doesn't make me feel afraid, but I also think his set of moves is very handsome. The white BMW is unwilling to show weakness and wants to compare the pink car in front of it. But my father didn't give him a chance. The white BMW made a mistake and chased. Our vehicle collided, and my pink Porsche rear headlights were smashed to pieces by a BMW. The BMW driver got out of the car with a dark face, slapped the hood of our car, and then went to the driver's seat and knocked on the glass. "How do you drive, this woman?" The glass of the car slowly fell. My father looked at the driver in front of him coldly and raised his eyebrows and asked, "What's wrong with me driving?" When the BMW driver saw the big man sitting in the driver's seat, he was speechless for a moment and held back for a long time before saying, "How can it be a man? What's wrong with the man? What's wrong with the woman? Is it a female driver who is sitting in the driver's seat? Can you mess around?" My father's voice is serious and oppressive. The BMW driver was stunned. When he saw me in the co-pilot, his tone was quite arrogant. He said disdainfully, "That's for sure. The female driver can't compare with our male driver, okay?" My father opened the door and stood in front of the BMW driver. My father's figure of more than 1.8 meters really crushed the BMW driver. He looked down at the BMW driver condescendingly. "Who gave you confidence?" The driver's momentum softened in an instant just now, muttered and said, "What's your business?" and then like a dog with a tail in it wanted to run back into his car. But my father stopped him and said, "Who allowed you to leave? You crashed my car, and the maintenance fee is enough to sell your broken car. Do I need to say more? It's up to you." Hearing the words, the BMW driver stopped. He quickly ran over to hand over the cigarette to my father, and the bowing look was really funny. "Boss, I don't know anything about Mount Tai. I heard that there is a good Yangzhou restaurant nearby. Let's discuss this matter there. What do you think?" My father sneered with a cigarette. He patted the BMW driver's face and said ruthlessly, "There is no need to discuss it." The BMW driver followed my father and called the boss several times, but my father didn't buy it at all. I looked at my father's set of operations and felt so handsome. When my father got back to the car, he said to me, "Don't be afraid to drive in the future. Dad will always be by your side." Later, the BMW driver had to send our vehicle for repair. 3. When we got home, my mother pulled me worriedly and carefully checked my whole body, as if she was afraid that something would happen to me. I hugged her and said, "It's okay. My father is with me." My mother patted me on the back and muttered, "It's okay. It's good to come back." A few days later, I went to my cousin's house as a guest. My cousin is already 8 months pregnant. She is full of her belly and says she wants to go to a barbecue restaurant. However, my cousin-in-law was not at home because of a business trip, and there was no one to accompany her to eat, so she grabbed my hand and spoiled me to let me go with her. I couldn't resist her coquettishness and agreed with a smile. My car was still under repair, so I went to drive a car in their garage. Behind the window is "Female driver on the road. Please take care of me." This label reminds me of my previous life. At that time, it was because of this label that my cousin gave birth prematurely. Since this label was put on, my brother-in-law's vehicle has often had problems, either being sirened or overtaken. Some drivers enjoy bullying these vulnerable groups to promote their superb driving skills. Build your own happiness on the pain of others. The most serious time was the malicious car. In order to avoid the vehicles in front of him, his brother-in-law accidentally hit a tree on the roadside. At that time, my cousin was also 8 months pregnant, and my brother-in-law took care of her. My brother-in-law was seriously injured, and my cousin was scared and gave birth prematurely when she was sent to the hospital. I looked at the label in disgust, and my cousin smiled and waved her hand in front of me. "What's the matter? Why are you in a daze?" I came back to my senses, tore off the label and said, "Don't put this label on it in the future." My cousin tilted her head and hugged me and said, "I know our female drivers' driving skills are no worse than others." My cousin's car is a black Volkswagen, which looks domineering. Go to the barbecue restaurant on the way. There is no label indicating gender and no color implying gender, and I drove very smoothly. No one rudely sounded the horn or flashed to us. No one overtook or got out of the car and insulted. When I got to the barbecue restaurant and had dinner, my cousin was satisfied, so I sent my cousin home. 2 months later, my cousin gave birth smoothly and gave birth to a pair of healthy dragon and phoenix fetuses. I suddenly realized that it was more effective to face it than to avoid it. 4. 2 days later, my friend sent me a message saying, "I got off the high-speed rail. Come and pick me up." This is exactly the foreplay of my accident. In the last life, not only my parents were sad about my death but also my friends. She had a car accident because I picked her up. She has been in regret and self-blame, and even suffered from depression at one time. In this life, things can't be allowed to happen like this. I want the male driver to pay the price he deserves. I replied with a smile. Okay, I'll drive my favorite car to pick you up. But my mother stopped me and said, 1 yen, drive your father's car. Faintly, I sensed my mother's concern, but I let go of my mother's hand and said with a smile, It's okay, Mom, don't worry. My father seemed to have a premonition of something, and his expression was a little solemn when he looked at me. He asked me, Do you want me to go with you? I smiled at my father. Dad, I'm not afraid now. My pink sports car has been repaired, sent home, and parked quietly in the garage. I sat in the car, took a deep breath, and drove on the road with the steering wheel. Sure enough, the male driver of the Land Rover in the previous life followed my car closely. After we got on the overpass, he deliberately approached my car body like in his previous life to shorten the safe distance between the two cars. I had already expected what he would do and dodged in advance. The Land Rover driver honked his horn crazily to show his contempt. I sneered twice. He maliciously said that the car was more and more excessive than the other. When he overtook in front of me, the two cars collided and made a sharp sound. He braked suddenly and tried to stop my car. This time, instead of hitting the steering wheel, I let the two cars collide. The moment the airbag bounced out, I felt pain. When I opened my eyes again, I'm not dead. I'm lying in the hospital bed. My mother held my hand and fell asleep by my bed. She noticed my awakening. I don't know whether I was happy or sad, and hugged me and cried. I comforted. It's okay. Am I okay? Before I could say the next sentence, the door of the ward was suddenly opened. A hysterical roar. You're all right. My son is still unconscious because of you. Why didn't it be you who died? That's the mother of the male driver, Ms. Zhou. 2 nurses stopped Ms. Zhou for fear that she would rush up. Mr. Zhou sneered and said, Cars are not made for women. What on earth do you want on the road? Do you want my son's life? My mother protected me behind me and took out her mobile phone to call the police. I stopped her and stared at the couple, humming contempt from my nose. According to the judicial big data report issued by the Supreme Court, nearly 95% of the defendants in traffic accidents are men. Why do you stigmatize female drivers? Mr. Zhou was stunned. He gritted his teeth and said, That's because the male driver has a large base. I sneered and said, So, is this your excuse to evade responsibility? They galled at me and I continued to retort. Your son's malicious car is also his own accident. If he doesn't die, it's his life, but if he doesn't obey the road safety, I put my car on a pink film, but I was discriminated against by the male driver. LOL, I not only want to put on the most pink one. 39103 inch all France hell. Ms. Zhou suddenly looked like crazy, pointing at my nose and cursing. You bitch, how dare you curse my son? Let's see if I don't tear your mouth. 5. Listening to her ugly words, I couldn't help getting up and slapping her hand to slap the bitch hard. But my mother grabbed my wrist and shook her head. I looked at her inexplicably. The next second, a crisp slap resounded throughout the bedroom. After shaking her hand dashingly, my mother gently lifted her hair. Although she had just finished the rough action of slapping, she was still elegant and comfortable. She sneered and said, Yen, it's better for Mom. Or I'm afraid that this madman will dirty your hands. Ms. Zhou was stunned by the fan. She covered her face and said several times that you didn't understand. The nurses quickly dragged her and Mr. Zhou out of the ward. It was not until they left the ward that they realized that Ms. Zhou opened the door of the ward and roared hysterically. I looked at my mother and we smiled at each other. In my last life, it was my parents who sued the male driver. In this life, we received threats and intimidation from the parents of male drivers. After I was discharged from the hospital, my friend came to visit me and cried a long time. He blamed himself. I'm sorry and it's all my fault. If I hadn't asked you to pick me up, you wouldn't have had an accident. I touched her head and said, I don't blame you. Even if I don't pick you up, I will have an accident sooner or later as long as I drive that pink car. My friend hugged me and said with tears in his nose, Don't comfort me anymore. It's all my fault, who? I smiled helplessly. Mr. and Mrs. Zhou came to the door at this time, with full and reliable evidence. They took out the driving recorder in the male driver's car. The video shows that I drove without keeping a safe distance and hit the Land Rover straight. There is fearlessness in their eyes. You female drivers are even aware of safety. No, why don't you keep your distance when driving? It's because you are careless, can't stay calm in the face of danger, and panic when something happens, which causes this accident. They continue to be aggressive. You should take full responsibility. Either compensate for the loss of 1 million, or wait for the lawsuit. They even began to attack physically. What kind of Porsche do you girls drive? Do you understand? I don't know where the money came from. It can't be sold. Mr. Zhou stopped talking and smiled lewdly. My mother scolded. You are so shameless. The brain is dirty and everything looks dirty. I looked at their ugly faces coldly and asked to look at the driving recorder again. I want to watch the video again. But they refused. Who knows if you will take the opportunity to destroy this video. Don't think I don't know your mind. My mother looked at them with anger, but there was nothing she could do. Yesterday she just went to adjust the monitoring and found that the monitoring near the overpass was damaged and was being repaired. We have no strong evidence to refute them. When they were about to leave they looked like a villain. Ms. Zhou said something strange. Women, it's better to stay at home and teach your children. Why do you have to drive on the road to embarrass yourself? Mr. and Mrs. Zhou thought that this video would scare me and let our family take compensation obediently. But in fact it's just their dream. What awaits them is not that they want $1 million in compensation, but a letter from a lawyer. My father sued them. The crime is extortion. 6. Mr. and Mrs. Zhou looked at the lawyer's letter and sneered. They have no evidence. What can they do with us? In order to speed up our compensation, they bought traffic on the internet and publicized my responsibility, which resonated with many netizens. Women should not appear on the road. They are slow to react, easy to retreat, and are more likely to cause traffic accidents. Oh my God, why is it a female driver again? If a woman doesn't stay at home, she has to go to society to harm people. But there are still rational netizens who hit the key. The video is incomplete, and there is a possibility of malicious editing. It's better to let the bullet fly for a while. Not to mention the male driver at all, it's all on the female driver's head. May the world love women as much as men do. I watched the video and Zhou and his wife complained about the harm of the female driver with tears in their eyes, and sneered twice. The male driver was finally discharged from the hospital. The first thing he did after being discharged from the hospital was to sue me. Watching him appear in the image of a victim, public opinion turned to them one after another. How bad is that woman's driving skills after being injured so badly? No, it's so heartbreaking. There is such a scar on the face, and you will be sad for the rest of your life. Brother, be strong. I believe you can survive. When my father took me to check it, he happened to meet the male driver Zhou Jingxing. He still sneered at me like in his previous life, and the lines were full of disrespect for women. Uncle, if you have spare money to buy a car for your daughter, it's better to save money for yourself. Wow, how can a woman's driving be compared with our men? Only we men really have control over the car, and we shouldn't let women go on the road. I nodded to him with a smile and signaled him to continue to say more. But what he didn't expect was the recorder that I secretly opened in my pocket. The more he said, the more excited he became. Our man's 3 accessories: women, cars and houses. I've seen a lot of female drivers like you, but they are too vain, powerful and money-worshipping. Do you think you can ride a luxury car on an equal level with us? It's ridiculous. And we big men. My father suddenly interrupted his chatter, so he sneered and turned around to ask me, have you recorded it? I took out my mobile phone and waved it at Zhou Jingxing. Of course. Hey, by the way, you just said what's wrong with your big man? Zhou Jingxing's face turned pale in an instant, as if the blood had been drained. You bitch. Unexpectedly, he used this kind of abuse to me. He roared hysterically and pounced on me like a vicious dog. He wanted to snatch the mobile phone in my hand, but my father punched him to the ground. My father looked down at Zhou Jingxing, who was curled up on the ground with a gloomy face. He said to Zhou Jingxing disdainfully, it's really a shame to have a man like you. 7. A few days later, Zhou and his wife saw that their son was beaten, blocking my door and pulling a banner. It is written on the banner, the vicious female driver, the road killer, please give me an way. They burst into tears, pulling their son whose nose was bruised and swollen, and cried about my crime. This female driver doesn't admit her responsibility at all. Let's go to beg for a word, but look at my son, who was beaten by their family. Is there any reason? My son is also the flesh of my heart. As a parent, I feel bad when I see my child being beaten. A large group of people soon gathered around. They exchanged heads and listened and discussed. The flash is flashing and the live broadcast is in progress. The whole network sympathized with the poor parents and kept attacking a vicious and inhuman female driver. I lay on the balcony and watched them make a big deal. The bigger the fuss, the better. My mother said, their family is really good at acting. It's a pity that they don't act. I smiled, put down the melon seeds, clapped my hands and said, it's time to show them some color. The next day, the whole thing began to reverse at 2 levels. I posted the whole process of the whole thing on the internet, a more complete and detailed video than the driving recorder in Zhou Jingxing's Land Rover. That's the driving recorder in my car. In the last life, my driving recorder was damaged and I didn't have time to replace it, but in this life I specially replaced a waterproof and anti-fabrication driving recorder. After waiting for so many days, the truth should be revealed. The comments attacking female drivers on the internet have disappeared one after another, and more comments for women have emerged. The female driver is really gentle and considerate. They drive very steadily and sit comfortably. Yes, I only take a taxi to the female driver's car. Their car is fragrant and clean, and it's very comfortable to sit on. One stone stirs up 1,000 waves and more bloggers speak out for women, demanding the removal of women's stigma on the road. And the Zhou family seemed to have disappeared. Many accounts were cancelled and no longer appeared in public. But I'm not going to let them go like this. My father made the video of their extortion public. In the video, the ugly face of Zhou's family was finally completely exposed to the public. Like a gutter mouse thrown in the sun, it has nowhere to hide. No way, their behavior is too disgusting. They even pretend to be victims on the internet. While violating the road safety law, it is really a crime to extort the victim. I have an impression of the Land Rover driver. He has been reported many times. He has maliciously targeted female drivers on the road many times. I looked at the comment section that finally returned to the right track and sighed deeply. I looked at my father and mother behind me, and the question I had been wondering about was finally answered at this moment. Mom and Dad, how did you die? My father and mother were stunned. After a moment of silence, they gave me a bittersweet smile. Yes, I'm asking about the previous life. All the signs of my parents show that they came from the same previous life as me. My father scratched his head, opened and closed his mouth, and finally chose to throw this problem to my mother. You'd better say it. I'm going to wash and sleep. My mother curled her lips and couldn't hold my father. She stopped talking. She sighed for a long time and smiled bitterly. We were too impulsive in those years, but we never regretted it. 8. My mother looked at my eyes brightly. I seemed to understand it. I wanted to hear the story of that year, but I didn't dare to listen to it. My mother said in a gentle voice, talking about the cruel ending. It turned out that they did not choose to hold back their anger when the prosecution was fruitless. My father went to a Ford store to repair my pink Porsche. That day, he took my car key and said to my mother with a smile, I'm leaving. You're fine by yourself. My mother covered her mouth and cried. She choked for a long time. She grabbed my father's sleeve and said, I'm with you. Our family should be tidy. That night, the Porsche carrying my parents crashed into Zhou Jingxing's Land Rover like crazy. I cried, covered my face and said sorry. It's all my fault. If it weren't for me, you wouldn't have. My mother hugged me and said, Yin, we never regret it. You just need to remember that we will always love you. My father came out of the bedroom at this time. He looked at me crying ridiculously and said with a smile, Okay, it's all over. Our family goes out to breathe and relax. The pink Porsche was dazzling and eye-catching, taking our family to the distant light. But there are always people who can't see the good of others. The Land Rover that collided in front of me. At that moment, I saw Zhou Jingxing's face twisted with anger. He opened his mouth as if he was saying, Go to hell. Go to hell. Go to hell. Damn it to me. My mother protected me and said in a trembling voice, Yin, don't be afraid. There was a loud bang. Then the sharp sound exploded in my ears. I felt a white light suddenly appeared in front of me, and I thought I was dead again. But I heard my father's amazed voice. Damn, it's good that I'm good at driving. I suddenly opened my eyes and saw my father smiling at us. My mother's hand on my head slowly loosened, and she sighed for a long time. It's okay. I looked back and saw that the Land Rover crashed straight into the building next to it, and white smoke came out of the hood. Dad, call 120 and call the police. I said quickly. Before my father took out his mobile phone to call the police, the Land Rover exploded with a bang. It's like movie special effects. I fell into silence while watching this scene. Each person has his own destiny, which is destined by heaven. Because of this incident, Mr. and Mrs. Zhou blocked my door with banners like crazy every day. The murderer returned my life. They waved the flag and shouted day by day. Not only that, they also publish their own bitter dramas on the short-sighted screen platform every day. But no one cares about it, and the traffic is getting worse and worse. My father dialed the property manager's phone. As a result, Mr. and Mrs. Zhou never appeared in front of our house again. That night, when I came home from work, I was suddenly pulled aside by an aunt. It turned out to be Ms. Zhou. She cried and said, You killed my son. You have to give us $1 million compensation. I said with a smile, Okay, if you want compensation, come with me. I took her to the police station. Hello, can I help you with anything? I replied, There is someone extorting here, and I have a recording. Ms. Zhou jumped out of the car and wanted to run, but I grabbed her wrist. I smiled and said, Auntie, why are you running? I haven't received the compensation yet. Ms. Zhou kept struggling. She refused in horror and said, I don't want it. I don't want it. Finally, they never appeared in my life again. Later, we went to the Ford store and my friend asked me, Yin, since the pink car film is easy to be targeted on the road, why don't you change it to a color? If I had something to think about, I agreed with her. Yes, you're right. I want to change the color. I turned my head and said to the manager, I want to change to a more beautiful and bright color.